So I think that's one of those things where you get a lot of people on the internet who are like, it's basically their career, I suppose, to say, oh, you don't need a JavaScript library to do this because you can do it like this as CSS variables, which is, how do I put it? Like, I'm glad that people are doing it, because without that, like, this will get looked at one day and someone's going to be like, oh, actually, I figured out, like, one Chrome developer who's super smart is just going to figure it out that we don't need to repaint these elements because these CSS variables are only used on this transform. So, you need the eyes, and it's also intellectual, like it's a clever approach in a sense, but it's also poor. It just doesn't perform as well. So, like, why do it? Like, why do it?
Hello guys, welcome to another episode Talks with Ido Evergreen. So in this particular episode, I'm just going to be talking about animation, right? And joining me on this episode is Matt Perry, who is the creator of Motion. The library was previously known as Framework-agnostic, and we're just going to be talking about animation and how developers could get started when it comes to performance, when it comes to building the best animations on the web. Hi, Matt.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for coming on the podcast to have this discussion with me. So Matt, let's just jump right into introductions, right? So just give us an intro of what you've been up to on the tech space in the last years.
Yeah, so I've been writing an animation library for, probably coming up a decade now. It started off as Pop Motion. I went to Framer and carried it on as Framer Motion for something like 6 years. And now I've taken it independent as Motion, which is like a animation library for React, Vue, and JavaScript.
Amazing. So quickly, just jump right into the conversation, right? So first off, what do you think makes a good animation?
I think it's two things. I think the answer you'll hear quite a lot is, was it like educational, in the sense of, has it informed the user that something's changed and maybe guided them through that change so that they can more easily understand what's happened? And I do think that that's a big, if not the biggest part of it. It's like basically to enable or improve accessibility. But I think for me as well, something that kind of gets overlooked is that I feel like animations can really make your UIs feel like essentially confident. And so imagine a carousel and you're flicking through all the items and you get to the end. I think a very normal way of dealing with you pressing next and there's no more items would be something like it just does nothing. The next button just becomes disabled and you sort of click it and nothing happens. But I feel like it's much cooler when you get like one where you click the next button and it does like a little tug, and it's like a little, like, I'm trying to go for that, but you've got no more items. Like, it's something a little bit more to say, this UI, we thought about you doing this and we've put effort into responding to it in a way that feels like engaging and feels like you're not just clicking on wood all of a sudden, like you were dealing with this reactive UI and now all of a sudden we stopped accepting your inputs. I think that can lend itself a sense of confidence to a UI, and it helps like the user trust, as well as making a more premium feeling experience. It can sort of like help users feel like a bit like, if your UI just breaks and that's a poor UI choice, is a choice. But if your UI breaks and you show an error message that's like a 101, that's another level up. And then if you send an error message, it's like, our site's broken. Obviously it's better the site doesn't break, but like, this site's broken and here's an actual, we've got something happening right now, or like a detailed message, that's another level. So in all these different ways, like just an error state can confer confidence. I think animations can do the same, basically.
Okay, amazing. So that was good. That was actually a very good answer. So speaking
You don't
about
need
the
to
core
seem
principle,
so surprised.
yeah. So what would you say are the core principles of motion, like creating animations actually, right? Because when you're building out animations on the web, right, they are basically principles, or should I say procedures you should follow. So can you just give us what are the core principles of when developers want to build out animations?
Yeah, I feel like because you hear about like core principles and stuff quite a lot, especially when it comes to like animation in general, you've got like that classic illustrative uh like cartoons essentially. Let's think of cartoons. And so you'll have all those principles and they get sort of regurgitated for UIs. So like you'll get things like squish and squash and like momentum and things, and some of this is really pertinent, but like there's something, it's not always pertinent. So like you don't necessarily need things to squish and squash. I think the things that really matter in terms of you, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I've seen some cool examples of this, but I just like, I think the really important principles of UI animations is essentially like, I think of it like I've got all this force in my fingers, like, and when I put that into the
Mm-hmm.
UI, like I want the UI to react with like a sort of dynamism that sort of feels like I've put imparted. So if I click on something, I want it to like
Mm-hmm.
react quickly and maybe slow down after. Like I don't need it to like, the easing's like quite important. Like you don't need something, if you clicked on something, you don't like, you'll see the default ease on CSS is like if you look at it on a graph. Is this audio only? Um, or is this video only? Because like if you're only listening to this, I'm describing a graph that sort of starts slow, goes quick in the middle, and ends slow. That's called like an ease in out, ease and curve.
Yeah, easy and
Because
out.
it eases
Yeah.
in, yeah, it goes quick in the middle and then eases back out again. I think that's really inappropriate for like for a user action like clicking or hovering or whatever. Because I'm putting in this energy, it should be like, it should take the energy quickly and then slow down. So anything that keeps that kind of interplay between the user, it's not, because otherwise it feels like I'm giving the interface a message. I'm saying it's like I'm saying I've just clicked on that. It doesn't feel like I've clicked on that. It's a bit more disconnected. That's also why I love Spring animations and that motion's based around Spring animations, because like if you interrupt an animation that's powered by a real physics spring, then the velocity of the
Mm-hmm.
animation will get incorporated into the interrupting animation. It'll just feel that continuation. It'll just feel like a more like living, breathing interface, basically, which I feel like is lost a tiny bit with with just normal timing based ease and curves. Not that they don't have a place, and I use them all the time, but
So let's just quickly just go and talk about animations in a framework agnostic way, right? So for me personally, right, so when I started out writing animation, I was basically making use of CSS3, and like when CSS3 really released, I think when CSS3 was released, right, and we had a lot of like animations and access to a lot of animation variables, right, before I even picked up Framer Motion or GSAP and whatnot back then. So how can developers pick up animation skills, right, in a framework agnostic way? What do I mean? So for example, I have a particular animation given to me by my UI designers, right? I'm supposed to accomplish this particular design. Now, the first thing I should be thinking about is how to accomplish this design without being tied to a tool, right? And when I mean tool, I'm basically referring to motion, that's Framer Motion, or any other Framer animation tool out there. So, how do you feel developers could approach animations from scratch without even thinking about the tool on the first approach?
yeah. So I actually really feel strongly that you should be completely bound to motion and never be able to use anything else, because obviously I'm incredibly biased. And there's sort of I'm joking, but there's also like a
Yeah.
serious point, which is I think you'll get a lot of people like, there's a lot of like, oh, it's better to use CSS for this. And you go, okay, well, I'll use CSS for this. And then you get to another bit, it's a bit more complex. And it'll be like, oh, yeah, well, for this, you need CSS animations, which is the whole keyframe syntax. And now okay, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
Go and learn what that is. Okay, great. Um, and then you get to another bit and it's like, oh, well, you can't really do this with CSS. Now you need to use JavaScript. And you go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, like what library am I? Do you know what I mean? And so that you keep on running into these like roadblocks of browser APIs, I feel. Whereas with if you just start with the JavaScript animation library, I think it's good to. I'm not saying don't learn CSS and stuff like that, but personally, I feel like um, a lot of in it for me. I just write everything in motion because like partly because like I'm comfortable with it, but I know that I'm not going to run into any roadblocks, and I know it's also going
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
perform The nice thing about motion is that it's got like this like hybrid engine where it will run most things on the JavaScript main thread, but if an animation can be hardware accelerated, it will use the what's called the Web Animations API. So you'll get the animation like running on the GPU
Perhaps,
essentially,
yeah.
which is nice. Like because that just means like if your web page gets busy or whatever, the animations won't slow down. It will continue to feel responsive. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and other JavaScript libraries don't really give you that. So that's the nice thing about like sticking to the one thing. But I do understand like the idea of like why, it's nice when you release something that you've like actually built from scratch. Um and for that, I think, no matter how you make your animations on a day-to-day basis, it is always, of course, good to know how does the transition style work, or how do CSS keyframes work? Like, that's not how I'd write them, just because I think in the majority of cases, I'll
Mm-hmm.
probably end up reaching for a Spring animation or something where I wish I'd used JavaScript. Um, but I think those two things are like the bedrock of library agnostic animations. The other thing is like a lot of these design tools that they let you make animations that can't necessarily be expressed with CSS alone. For instance, like Figma just released their sites builder, and all of the animations in there they're built on motion. So if someone's designed a site in Figma and they've added an animation, well, that animation's using motion spring physics. So, if you want to recreate the animation in real life, you're going to have to use motion essentially, or some part of it. So that's the other thing I'd say. Same with Webflow, like
Okay.
they've just
Okay.
started
Cool.
using Greenstock officially. And so if you've made an animation in Webflow, I mean, typically it's the same with Framer as well. Like Framer being based on motion. If you build a website in either of those, you're probably going to click the publish button and just have it like live anyway. So there's no real handoff. But say for some reason you did want to copy an animation built in one of those tools, your best bet is to recreating that is to use the library that it was sort of built on. So for Webflow, that would be Greenstock, and for Framer, that would be Motion.
Okay, cool. So now speaking about performance first, so I just want to touch about performance, accessibility, and maybe user experience, right? When it comes to animations. So what do you think about performance? Because um when you're building animations, personally, my personal experience, your animation could affect the performance of your site if it's not written maybe in the best practice or in the best method. So what do you think about performance first, and how developers could approach writing animations that has the best performance on the web?
Yeah, so the very fundamental thing is that the four values that you can safely animate, like like with the maximum performance, is opacity, transform, filter, and clip path. And if you animate any other value, then what you're doing is causing the browser to repaint. It's called a repaint. So what you can do, so if you're animating transform, you can give an element essentially to the GPU, and you can say, okay, you are now responsible. You don't have to say all this; it'll do it automatically. But in essence, what you're saying is you are now responsible for drawing this and for running the animations. Even I want to hear about. I don't want to know what goes on over there. And the GPU will animate and paint. So update that element completely off the CPU. And so that means that when you're running a for loop that takes ages or something, some busy work, right? Rearranging the page, doesn't matter. The GPU will not be interrupted by that process, and so your animations will run smoothly. Whereas when you start getting into like repainting, well, now you're bringing the CPU back into things. Yeah, so if you animate anything else, you're sort of starting to repaint the browser, so that's like background color, mask image, or anything like that. Which in and of itself isn't necessarily the worst thing. How big's the area that you're repainting? Like, there's all sorts of like how many elements are you repainting at the same time? There's so many things that come into like what is good and bad performance. But that's one level, I should say. And then there's a whole nother class of values that are bad to they're like, or even worse to animate, and they're layout values. So like things like width and height, top left, anything like that. Flexbox direction, flex direction, anything that causes the browser to recalculate layout is like a whole nother um it's like a whole nother category of bad performance essentially. But yeah, so
Yeah.
with those values, I'm just explaining that for those who missed it, I was just explaining that there's a whole class of values that like trigger paints and then trigger layout, and so they're all these tiers of things, and not just the core point is that you have to, everything is sort of, you just have to measure it, because like your repaints are worse than a completely GPU animation, but how big's the element that you're repainting? It could be really cheap. Likewise, laying out and like triggering layout is bad, but not all layouts are the same. Like if it's just one element on an isolated layer that's not re-rendering or reflowing the rest of the page, it probably doesn't matter. But that's up to you to sort of, what sort of devices are your users using? Are they, is there a lot of low power devices out there? Don't trigger layout, animations. Or layout, don't start layout triggering animations, I should say, because there's also like the conversation of layout animations, which is what motion does. Motion for React and Motion for View has this layout animations engine where they take changes to layout, and instead of
Yeah.
animating width, for instance, it will turn that into a transform, so scale or top and stuff. Now you've taken what was layout triggering animations, now you're animating them with transform instead, which is not going to trigger even paint, let alone layout. There are ways as well to do things. The view animations, the view transition API, is
Mm-hmm.
a new browser API that allows you to do kind of the same thing, where you can, take an expensive or maybe even impossible layout animation and do it via a browser API.
So that's quite a whole lot about performance when it comes to animation. A personal question I just want to ask about this is I read an article where you wrote about when thinking about performance you should actually animate those four values you already mentioned. Are there any tools out there for developers to monitor performance when it comes to animation? So, for example, now, for me personally, I already know that okay, if I'm working on an animation, right, I'm supposed to animate those four values. I think you mentioned the opacity, the clip part, if it's an SVG, right? Then you mentioned two other values like the users could actually animate to get the best performance. But if I'm animating, right, I might start animating the font size or maybe width instead of using transform, like you said. So are there other tools or are there tools out there? Because basically before now, I think what developers could get to use is the Chrome Dev tool, right? So I don't know if there are other tools for developers to monitor performance while building out animations.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything else, because I always use Chrome DevTools as well. If you go to the Performance tab, there's like you can start recording, then trigger the animation, and then you can go into the recording. It's not perfect because, like, so for instance, one thing you can do is throttle the CPU, and so often I'll throttle it down to 4, 6, maybe even 20x, depending on what I'm doing. But your GPU is still unthrottled, so that it affects some things. But then, like, if you've got like composited animations, like GPU animations, then that they're not going to be slowed down at all, and you're not really. Likewise, you can. This is really like, you probably won't run into this, but like there's certain layers that can be really heavy, essentially, to transfer to the GPU. So when you say there's a property called will change, this is a CSS style, and you can set that on a layer, and you can say to the browser, look, this layer, we're probably going to animate the opacity, or we're probably going to animate transform, and it can go, okay, great, well, I'll send that to the GPU now, so that I don't have to do it when we start the animation. You won't see like a jump or like some sort of stutter. But every layer is like it's a two-dimensional thing. It's a two-dimensional texture essentially, and so the size, memory wise, the size can um what's it can balloon. But like every pixel you go out width or height, you're like, it's like a square. It's a square that squared essentially. Um, so much bigger images can start getting like a lot of data to pass to the GPU. There's no real way of saying like it's a Chrome DevTools, oh, can you emulate a device that's just got a really low memory bandwidth for me, like some really old Android phone or something like that. And so there's no better way to test the performance of certain animations or performance problems than actually getting a low powered device.
Uh,
and testing it on there. I don't do this for everything, but if this is like a problem that comes up, especially if you're targeting users with that, that a lot of them use a low power device, then that's, you just have to get a low power device to realistically see what their performance is. And the other thing you can do with this is, and it works for older iPhones as well, you can hook up the device to your desktop like via a USB thing, and you can use your desktop, you can use your DevTools here on the for the thing that's running on the mobile browser. So that's another nice thing you can do by having a real device.
so let's just quickly just talk about still on performance, right? Let's just quickly just talk about the common pitfalls, right? Developers get to experience or developers get to find themselves in. I think we already mentioned some of them. Why working on performance, right? Like in your animations. So um you could just mention some of them developers should avoid. I think the number one on top of my head right now could be to avoid animating the properties, right? You already mentioned four different properties developers should always aim for to animate if they are working on animations. So what other common pitfalls do you feel like developers should avoid to get best animations when it comes to performance, or instead of having laggy or jant animations on the web?
So one thing that is, just say it's controversial. That one way that you can animate values that are like composite values is by animating CSS variables and then putting those into like a string. So like say, is this a good example? Yeah, say you wanted to animate a transform string, but you wanted to animate all the transforms independently. One approach would be to animate the like a scale CSS variable, or and a translate X CSS variable, and then combine all those with a string, with the template. But every time you change a CSS variable, the elements that are affected by it will repaint. So even though you're
Mm-hmm.
animating a transform, the this is something that shouldn't need repainting, but it will, because you're doing it you're doing it via a CSS variable. So generally you get like better performance, I think, with by using something like Motion, which can or GreenSock does the same thing, and Anime probably does the same thing. But by using a JavaScript animation library to animate independent transforms, you don't get that hardware acceleration because WAPI isn't capable of it. But you'll get better performance by using a JavaScript library than by using CSS variables. So I think that's one of those things where you get a lot of people on the internet who are like, it's basically their career, I suppose, to say, oh, you don't need a JavaScript library to do this because you can do it like this as CSS variables, which is, how do I put it? Like, I'm glad that people are doing it, because
Uh-huh.
without that, like, this will get looked at one day and someone's going to be like, oh, actually, I figured out, like, one Chrome developer who's super smart is just going to figure it out that we don't need to repaint these elements because these CSS variables are only used on this transform. You need the eyes, and it's also it's a clever approach in a sense, but it's also poor. It just doesn't perform as well. Like, why do it? Yeah, why do it? Like, but then performance isn't one thing as well. So that you could argue that by, but the performance, like, you do save the initial the initial download of a JavaScript library. So
Mm-hmm.
this, but then connection speeds are getting faster. But then, are they getting faster than the device is getting powerful? So there's all these considerations. I'm not saying it's so easy, but sometimes a bit of an upfront cost is worth the performance that you get for the rest of the user session, I'd say. But yeah.
Yeah, so just one question I just want to ask on this right now is so at what point should a developer, or should I say a design team, right? Because most times the designers hand off the animations to the developers to recreate on the web. So at what point um is an animation too much or too less, right? Because there are some sites you go to, you see a whole lot of animations and you're just distracted and you don't even know what's going on, right? And you could go to some other site
Yeah.
to see minimal animations and you get the information and what the application is supposed to do, like straight up from the animation. So what if you feel like it's too much animation or too less? How can developers or design team structure, or should I say place the balance between too much or less animation?
Yeah, so like recently I've been thinking about this because as part of Motion Plus, which is the sort of the it's like a collection of premium examples and collections for motion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, probably the biggest component in there at the moment is the cursor component. And I was doing some
Seen
examples with
that?
it, and I was like, it's funny because like, oh, thanks, yeah, oh, I remember, yeah. The thing about them is they're obviously not for every site, and so like certain things, but then I was like, but certain things are. So one of the examples we've got is when you hover over a photo, it shows you which camera that was taken with, and it just sort of trails your mouse with a little spring, and it's quite subtle. That would
Huh?
probably be okay on basically any site. Like if you think of Wikipedia as your ultimate no animation because it's full info, zero
Mm-hmm.
fluff. But you could imagine like a little tooltip esque thing when you hover over something, or like a preview of the next page or something. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But like you can see that. So there's a whole gradient there. That's like the minimum of what you might use this for. To one of the examples, which was like a spinning reticule that looked like you're in a fighter plane or something, and then when you hovered over it, the reticule would like stretch out onto to select like the element while your little dot moved around on the inside. And I thought, well, that's not, obviously this isn't for every site. And I think I got a couple of comments that was like, well, that's not good UX. And it's like, yeah, I don't want it everywhere, Jesus Christ. But like,
Yeah.
if I went onto one website and someone had done that for their one website, and that one website was like a portfolio or just something a bit more experimental, where it's not, the purpose of the site isn't just to give you
Mm-hmm.
information. Maybe they're playing around, or they're maybe, yeah, like it's a showcase sort of website. Then I can imagine something like that. So it depends on the site versus what the appropriate level of animation is. Like, Wikipedia,
Mm-hmm.
very little, if any. Portfolio site or studio landing page or product, like a marketing page. Like, yeah, go to town. Like, as long as you don't make people sick, because you got like so many things moving around, and as long as you get your message across, because your message might be, I'm an experimental developer. Well, in that case, then really the sky's the limit there.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends on what is the site.
Okay. Okay. Amazing. So now thinking about that particular answer, I just want to talk about the new, what's the word now? The new animation libraries, not libraries, the new animation APIs we have on the web. I think Framework Motion was founded like many years ago, right? When CSS didn't have some capability, right? Like he had a lot of should I say a lot of doesn't have a lot of abilities to do a lot of things that it can do these days, right? So let's just quickly talk about the new animations, the new animation library or new animation APIs. I'm basically referring to the web animation API, or even I think you mentioned view transition API. So what do you think about this new APIs coming out on the web, being natively introduced to the web?
Well, it's great because, well, so for a start, some of them do things that were like essentially impossible before. So the view transition API, that was not a possible thing. Likewise, scroll timeline, that was possible, but like it was harder to keep, especially in some browsers. Like you couldn't. The problem with scroll animations is that you have to read the scroll position every frame, which is like it triggers a recalculation. So unless you're really careful, um, you can really like hurt your performance and stuff. And um, and if you, the nice thing about scroll timeline is that you can run scroll animations now entirely on the GPU. So that wasn't possible before
Okay.
either. Um, like it was the same with web animations API. Like it wasn't possible to run animations on the GPU via JavaScript until that came out. And that's why like I build APIs around browser APIs, because if you like, Greenstock is a good example of like their approach to triggering an animation is something that enters the viewport. They do like essentially a scroll animation, and they check that they have to measure the element. They check scroll every time. Okay, is it in the viewport? Let's trigger the thing. Whereas motion uses the intersection observer, which again is like it's just a browser API that kind of does the same thing, but for a lot cheaper. Likewise, we use the Web Animations API where we can for hardware acceleration. Likewise, we use Scroll Timeline where we can for hardware acceleration. There's a View Transition API. So essentially what I'm getting to is like anywhere we can leverage these APIs, we do. So the more that we have, the better. But I'd say it's also a bit of a jQuery situation where our use of the APIs is often to smooth over the edges. They're not always easiest to use. Web animation API is like a perfect example. Like if you run a web animation API or WAPI animation, then when it finishes, like your element sort of gets ditched in the position it started at, not the position that the animation ended at. And so the whole thing's just full of like these kinds of things that motion really is there to paper over or to fix essentially. So it's good that it exists, but like personally, I don't use these things without motion because I just know that like they're much easier to use often when you use the library on top. And then one last thing that there's an API that I really like, but again, it shows you the limitations of the browser. Using the browser APIs is starting style CSS rule. And it just means that on it basically says like, well, so it means like when this element's added, start it in say you have opacity 0. And then when when it's been mounted, it will run a transition to whatever your actual styles are. So if it's opacity 1 and you then but you add at starting style opacity 0, then on mount it will animate from opacity 0 to opacity 1. Which like surprisingly is still something that you kind of need motion to do, like these mount animations. But you know, there's no. It's like, well, okay, well now I want this CSS to define my thing in CSS, but I want to do it dynamically based on component props, and it's like, well, okay, well now, like, well, you know, I might naively put that into a style attribute instead. Oh, but there's no starting style attribute. It's only in CSS blocks that you can use it. They're generally, depending on your pipeline, a little harder to dynamically generate or whatever it is. So they're good in some respects, but then but I want to do it like this. Oh, I've hit a wall. Oh, now I'm reaching for a library. So there's, it's good that it exists, but it doesn't really cover all the use cases, I'd say.
Okay, yeah. I think that last word I was gonna ask you concerning motion, right? So basically, what APIs basically the browser provides that motion actually supports natively, right? I think you already mentioned it. So let's quickly talk about motion, right? Because motion is like I think the big animation library out there. And let's quickly just talk about what's been happening and what's been up with the team at motion, right? So for people that don't know what motion is, or they haven't gotten to try out Framework-motion before it was named as motion, can you just give us a quick intro about what motion is and what has been like the update from the motion team so far?
Yeah, so the short way of putting it is that it is a simple animation API for React, Vue, and vanilla JavaScript. Could stop there. It's predominantly, I guess, a little bit more is like it's based on like predominantly like Spring animations. Makes it super easy to use those. For React and Vue, it has a super powerful layout animation system. And for vanilla JavaScript, we're building out like a low level reactive API with like essentially, if you're familiar with like signals, something closer to that, we call them motion values. For really like more advanced use cases, you can build up these your own rendering pipelines, but that is like the more advanced use cases, I suppose. But yeah, since taking it independent, I've like spent some time like building out the examples library. So we've got a mix of free, like the fundamentals or free source code. But then when you get to more advanced cases, like things that are inspired by iOS or whatever it is, and then those are like Motion Plus only. And that's sort of how I fund the project now.
Amazing. Okay, so speaking about motion again, right? I think back then we had motion one. I don't know if that still exists, um, or it's already included into motion right now.
Yeah, that's right. So Motion One like was a bit of a side project, and then like based around like how much can I get out of animation API. And so a lot of those techniques ended up in Framework-agnostic. Um, and then when I made Motion, I released like a mini animate function, which is powered by WAPI, and it's only like 2.5 kilobytes, I think.
Okay.
And that one is essentially like the spiritual successor to Motion One.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. Amazing. So can you just share us some lessons you learned while building Framer Motion? So what are the lessons you got to learn while building out Framer Motion as a library maintainer or a library creator, right? So what lessons have you learned or are you still learning, right? While building out Motion.
One of the lessons, it's more about myself really, that I'm learning is that because now like I can basically now it's essentially a business, which is
Yeah.
great, because I have like a much higher degree of freedom to I suppose how I should put it is that the interests of all the users is basically aligned with my own commercial interests now, which is like way better for the project as a whole. Um, but it's more like I, I feel like up from that side, it's more like I've just really learned like what do I enjoy, and that's like I really enjoy coding and making features
Yeah.
that people like to use, and I think a lot of that is I think there's the temptation to be like, okay, well, if this is a business, like, what can we do not to expand, but like, oh, I want to do this, this, and this. How much time do I realistically have? Not enough. Do I get someone else in to like, now we can divide the workload and get way more done? Maybe, and then, do you get a third
Mm-hmm.
employee? And so then all of a sudden you're not coding, you're building a business. Well, I didn't do this to build a
Yeah.
business. I did this to just be able to have the freedom to code kind of what I wanted. So it's more
Yeah.
recognizing that and being disciplined about like not getting distracted by things that I ultimately won't enjoy, basically. Um, so so there's one, yeah, there's one lesson. And yeah, I think the other lesson is like I like working with other people. I think I know now about myself is that I love that I have just this project to myself a little bit, and that I
Mm-hmm.
can just like I keep the whole thing up in here, and yeah, so it's a hard work. Like if I could work within, I mean, it was perfect at Framer really because I was working with it like on my own, but within a group of people that I really loved. So it was that was a better working environment for me. But
Amazing.
then you get in terms of the project, like you start having to do, what's but not just what's best for the users of Frame of Motion, but what's best for the business, and that that's like a whole dynamic that just it wasn't so in a sense that was sacrificed. That working environment was
Mm.
sacrificed, and now I'm like, I work on my own, which I love because I want to just sit down, do more work, sort of thing. But I also loved sitting down, having lunch with people. So I'd say most of the lessons have been more about like understanding myself and choosing what's important.
Amazing, amazing lessons you've gotten to learn and write and still learning, right? Building out motion. So now let's pick out practical scenarios, right? Or practical questions. So I want to pick up animations. I want to learn how to build animations, right? Or I want to learn how to build animations on the web. Um, with motion, right? Because that's basically what we're discussing. So, what's the duration? How long do you think I'll be able to pick up the skill to be able to create complex animations? So now I ask this question personally because for me, I've always been this person that like I always loved animation, right? And I see a lot of animations I might not really be able to recreate like on first glance, right? But taking out time or maybe learning how the animation was created and looking at it again, I can create maybe a version one of that particular animation. So, how long does it take a newbie to get started with animation and building out complex animations with motion?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it depends what you consider a complex animation. Because I think I done this for too long, in the sense that you forget how intimidating animations can be, like to
Yeah.
people who haven't done them before. And that's why I really like. this is sort of why it winds me up a little bit when people are like, "Oh, but you can do it in CSS and look at this," and you look at the code and it's like
Yeah.
all this calc shit and fucking all these, I don't know, all this CSS garbage essentially that isn't like readable by a human being. Um,
Hmm.
and so when I write APIs for motion, like I just try and remember, like, this should be accessible. Even the advanced APIs, like, this should be simple. This should be like layout animations, for instance. Like, the stuff layout animations are doing are like ridiculously complex in the sense of, like, you can animate between two different layouts, completely different elements. It will do it all with transforms. It will correct the scale distortion on children, on border radius, things like that. And you
Amazing.
enable it all just by writing the word layout. So if you can write the word layout, you can perform that animation, and that's like what good. Like, that's how simple it should be. And there's some things that I've not released, for instance, layout animations
Hmm.
for vanilla JavaScript, because I can't figure out a simple API. Like, I don't want to. I'm not going to release it if it can't be like a simple thing. Then I'm not going to release it,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Okay.
So in terms of, like, how long will it take you? Like, I don't know, because, like, I think I could be better at explaining concepts via the documentation. So it's funny because, like, in the sense of, like, the API, I think the API is simple, but is my technical writing skills good enough to make it simple to communicate that to people? I don't know, like, but yeah, things like Spring animations, layout animations, they are complex, but they're simple to write in motion. You could spin one up in the next 5 minutes if you wanted. Um, but then you get other things, like, especially when you look into, I don't know, scroll animations are often kind of more difficult. I think it would take you like maybe a day or two to really wrap your head around a scroll animation, perhaps if this was the first time you've ever seen it. Um, but it's hard to say because I think everyone's different, and I think the things that and yeah, it's funny to see, not funny like haha, but like it's interesting to see where different people hit a wall. Like, it's different for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. That was that was very very amazing answer because, like I said, personally, it's been should I say a blocker for me building out animations, but like you said, going through documentation most times helps, right? I think with motion documentation, which is very very detailed, with every API available currently on the API on the library itself. Amazing. So we're quickly already coming to the end of this to the episode. So just few last questions. So are there any other misconceptions you feel like people on the internet have about animations and they should drop?
Any misconceptions? I think one thing that I see is that JavaScript animations are always slower than web animations. So that's so beyond true. For one, I don't get to rant mode. For one, so if you do motion and if you use a motion and you're animating transform, opacity, filters, clip path, those animations are going to perform exactly as fast as any CSS animation because they're using WAPI. Likewise, say you're not using WAPI and you're now animating on the main thread, and it's something like, I don't know, background color. Um, so I think motion doesn't concentrate as much on per frame performance as something like GreenSock. And I say that specifically because motion's fast, and it's actually faster, way like beyond faster in certain ways. Like, starting 100 animations is beyond faster in motion than it is GreenSock. However, if you were to run 1,000 animations, there's a classic Starfield demo where the GreenSock is animating thousands of elements, and they're all like little star things. It can pump out like thousands, and so can motion. But, like, I think that the motion just per frame. If you're getting into like, if you're animating a Starfield, then what are we doing? In that particular demo, I think that GreenSock is faster.
Hmm.
Hopefully not forever,
Okay.
but it is at the moment. But the point is, if I got distracted by myself, that the GreenSock is faster than if you were to run the same animation thousands of times with CSS.
Hmm.
So the GreenSock engine is so much more like less memory intense, or whatever. I don't, however WAPI or the underlying browser implementation is slow. WAPI is, and that's a JavaScript animation library. So it just is, yeah, it's just patently, you can't, there's very few ways in which you can cut it where like a CSS is necessarily faster than JavaScript. So I don't think that's I don't think it's true at all. And I think that the nice thing about putting it in the land of JavaScript is that like we get that control. Like, you know, I'm working at the moment on reducing the per frame overhead of motion. Like once like the browsers aren't going to do that. Well, they've got better things. They've got better things to do basically. Whereas this is our bread and butter. So you know, we're going to concentrate on things like that.
Amazing. So one quick question about motion, right? So are we ever going to get a dev tool for motion?
Yeah, so there was like a motion dev tool that I made for
Yeah.
Motion One. But since sunsetting Motion One, I sunsetted the dev tool. And I would say because like it's I do have to look at it like a business now.
Yeah.
And I remember like what the sales were like for DevTools, and they weren't bad. Like for a side project, it was pretty good actually. But if I consider what it takes now to match like the sponsorship or Motion One, it's not that it has to be anything special, but it's just more like I've got to think about what's going to move the needle on Motion Plus. That's what I mean. So is it going to be? Am I better off making DevTools, or am I better off making another 100 super advanced examples, or like a carousel component, or something like this? So like I've got to really consider that side of things in terms of what's going
Yeah.
to move the needle on business wise. So I'm not convinced that a DevTools is going to be the thing, even though I'd kind of love to do it because I really enjoyed working on the last one. And one of the other things that I've thought about is
Okay.
like, would it be cool to? Have you ever seen Theatre.js? It's like a timeline editor API, and part of me's like, oh, maybe it'd be cool to take the stuff that I made for the dev tools and like maybe not make another dev tool, but make it like an API where people can embed their own timeline editor or bits of it or customize one, stick it in their web builder or whatever it is, and you know, if is it possible to sell, if you could sell like even 5 of those to companies for a lot of money, then that becomes like a worthwhile business. But
Yeah.
it's just but would it work? So you know, that's a conversation that I'd love to have with a couple of companies that I've got in mind, if they would be interested in that. But if not, I don't see it. Yeah, again, it's
Amazing.
like that, having that discipline. Like I'd love to do it, but
Yeah.
realistically, like, is it going to help me carry this on into the future?
Yeah. 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 That's quite understandable. So what's next for motion, right? What's next for motion? I think you mentioned Motion Plus. So are there any other updates coming from the team? What should developers or the full ecosystem expect from motion?
Yeah, so there's a lot more to come for like JavaScript APIs. So we've got a Vue Transition API that it just makes the Vue Transition API like easier to use essentially. And I just want to keep rolling in updates to that. And then the reactive API. So if you use Motion for React, you know about hooks like use transform or use Spring, and I want to bring all of that to vanilla so that everyone has those APIs or similar. And a few of them are out in Motion Plus early access as well. Um, and and performance, like I've got some bits of the code that I want to rewrite just to ensure that we're doing as little as possible every frame, and make sure
Yeah.
that animations keep running faster.
Uh-huh. Amazing. Okay, amazing future for motion, and we're really waiting to see what motion has for the developer ecosystem. Because so far it's been given from like the earlier days of Framework motion to now we have motion, and amazing stuff from the team and you and the team. So I don't know, it's
Oh,
been a
thanks.
great job, Matt. What you've been doing with motion, and I don't know, it's been a really amazing job. So we've come to the end of this conversation, actually, right? So Matt, I don't know if you have any maybe word of encouragement to developers out there thinking about animations, maybe starting out their own animation library or building on already existing ones. Just one word of advice to the engineers out there.
Yeah, just like actually the one bit of advice really is like you'll hear like it's used derogatively, like not invented here syndrome. Like, why are you writing something that's already been written, essentially? And it's just, I find it, just don't, if you hear that shit, don't listen to it, man. Like, just do it because you learn. Like it's a great way to learn. So if you want to write your own version of this, like maybe you do it better than the other person did. Like a lot of big businesses, massive businesses, because they just copied someone else's idea and just did it better than that other person. Um, Now, obviously, if that other thing's an animation library, then just forget it. It's already been done. Don't worry about it. But anything else, you
Yeah.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. So yeah, so I just like, so speaking about AI, because we're already in the age of AI right now. I could say AI tools right now, we have the LLMs giving out bad animations, right? When I mean bad animations, I mean, for example, if you prompt an LLM to give you a particular animation um on framer motion or motion, right? There's a tendency that the LLM is going to make use of a hook that doesn't exist, right, in motion.
Mm.
Like I've personally experienced this, like when building out animations. And so what do you think about AI and animations and libraries, animation maintainers, and you guys maintaining libraries? Because I think you made a post recently about putting out a I can't really remember, but I know it has to do with LLM for motion, right? So LLMs are going out to the internet to get data and like to update their resource, right? So what do you think about AI and animations?
Yeah. So the LLM stuff is basically like LLM friendly docs. So if you go to llms dot motion dot dev, there's like a AI consumable. It's just the docs basically, but in Markdown. Um, and the whole thing um about that is basically I also use LLMs and I hate what they do. Like they're really good for some things, but you're right. Like it just hallucinates a bunch of like motion APIs, and so
Yeah.
there's the LLM docs. And I enjoy like co-piloting with an LLM. I think it's a big tailwind, not like the CSS, like, but yeah, it's literally like a great production booster. When it gets
Mm-hmm.
things right. So the LLMs.motion.dev is just to help it get things right. And likewise in Motion Plus, there's like I write my own rule set. Just to like, if you were going to do this, do that, blah blah blah, and just it just really guides the LLM, and I use that to help me write the
Amazing.
examples.motion.dev. And then I put, so
Huh.
as I'm writing examples, I improve the LLM. When it gets things wrong, I improve the rule set, and then the rule set you get as part of Motion Plus. So I put that in the
Huh.
Motion Plus private repo. And so I'm trying to keep that spinning as well, because hopefully it's like having a little me. Not with the same personality, obviously, because that would be appalling. But like just in terms of motion knowledge in your
Yeah.
LLM, that's what I'd love to be able to do.
Hmm.
Not that I make like great animations, but I at least know how the library works, which is more than I can say for Claude. Claude 3.7.
Yeah, yeah, amazing, amazing. So yeah, so I think that basically could actually help the set of rules, for example, maybe cursor, right? If you have set of rules already set up for how motion is supposed to be used, right? Could actually give these LLMs the way how to actually, because it's an actual big issue, because it could bring out like I said, an hook that does not exist. Then you'd be like, Matt Perry never exported this hook, so where are you getting this? So like, yeah, so yeah, so yeah, amazing, amazing, amazing. So it's been an amazing episode. We've gotten to talk about all things animations. We talked about motion, talked about motion plus the future of animation, and what's been going on with like on the browser natively. It's been an amazing episode. I think if you're still listening or watching to this point, thank you for sticking around, and make sure you subscribe and also leave a like, and also share this episode with your animation friends or your fellow engineers that are interested in animations. Yeah, so Matt, thank you for coming to the channel to come have this discussion, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, see you guys in the next one. Bye.